Welcome in everyone, this is Sean with MTG808 Jr. and today we're going to be taking a kind of a big look at the Standard Pauper format, getting ready for the upcoming release of Dominaria, which is going to shake things up, add a number of new cards to the card pool for Standard Pauper. But before we jump into doing that, just want to make sure everyone knows about our upcoming Youth Championship Scholarship Tournament. We've set a date and location for the tournament. It is going to be Saturday, May 12th. At Dirtle Zone, which is a local card shop here on Oahu in Aiea or Pearl City. It's going to be $5 to enter, and which is a little more than our usual tournaments, but we will be giving away $750 in scholarship prizes. First place will be getting $500, second place will be getting $250. So make sure you follow us on Facebook. You're in the right place to follow our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, and you will stay up to date on all of your Standard Pauper needs and strategy. So jumping into kind of big picture metagame stuff. When I say metagame just means kind of the game within the game, right? There's individual games of Magic, and then if you take a step outside of that, there's the game of kind of deck building and knowing what decks to expect and what decks that you need to be prepared for. That's what we mean when we say metagame. And I think that the Standard Pauper metagame is actually incredibly diverse. Even though we have a very restrictive card pool of only being able to play commons, there's just a ton of diversity in the metagame. If you take a look at our Standard Pauper deck techs, what is this called? Our Standard Pauper deck techs playlist on our YouTube channel here, we've got 26 videos. Now, there's a little overlap in terms of decks featured in these videos because we do the top 4 tournament recaps after each tournament. But there's still like 20 different individual strategies that you can choose to play in Standard Pauper. So no matter what type of deck you like to play, there's probably a deck for you in Standard Pauper that can be reasonably competitive. So keeping that in mind, we want to kind of take a step back and look at what makes the decks that are good, what makes them good. And as we kind of saw with Kyle taking first here at our March 17th tournament, with his mono black aggro deck. I did promise you guys a more in-depth deck tech on this deck. I went back and listened to what I said about it in that top 4 recap video, and I don't really have too much to add. If you did want to pick this deck up, some recommendations I would make would be to add a Moment of Craving instead of Die Young, and cut the Defiant Salvagers either for more 2-drops or more removal, basically. But besides that, I think, or even Renegade Freighter might be a good addition here instead of Defiant Salvager. I just think Defiant Salvager is a little underpowered. The fact that you can only use the activated ability at sorcery speed, makes this guy just a little bit clunky. Kyle obviously had success with it, but I think this is the weakest card in the deck. So with that spiel aside about mono black vehicles, what made this deck really good is that it just maximizes all the best possible 1 mana plays that black has, and really pushes the tempo game, right? Using your mana more efficiently than your opponent, to just bury your opponent in tempo, right? If you play a 1-drop on turn 1, and then 2 1-drops on turn 2, and then, a 2-drop and a 1-drop on turn 3, then you've spent 6 mana in the first 3 turns. If your opponent didn't do anything in those first 3 turns, you're 6 mana ahead in terms of tempo that has impacted the board. So using that, keeping that principle in mind that's what we mean when we say tempo. We're going to be taking a look at the 1-drops that kind of impact the board, or at least give you an effect that is that doesn't necessarily impact the board, but that gives you flexibility and options. So here we have, I've pulled out all of the 1 mana spells that kind of impact the board. If you've been following the channel, a lot of these are going to be very, very familiar. I will speak a little bit to the ones that aren't necessarily that haven't been featured in successful decks yet, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But basically, the rule of thumb here is that you have the 1-mana creatures that you can play on turn 1. They start pressuring your opponent. Most of them are pretty good at attacking. Some of them have utility abilities later in the game, like Fanbearer or Bloodlust Inciter. Frilled Sandwalla lets you pump stuff up. Night Market Lookout combos really well with vehicles to just kind of drain your opponent out. And, Skittering Heartstopper has Death Touch. So these are 1-mana creatures that add a little bit of power to the board and then also give you an ability or some flexibility later in the game. Fanatical Firebrand is another really good example, right? Get in for that 1 damage on turn 1, and then you have the option to shoot something for 1 later. Start pressuring the board with your unblockable creatures. One of the creatures here that we haven't necessarily seen in too many decks, if at all, is Snubhorn Sentry. This one is in a really weird place, but I have it here on the list of decent 1-mana plays because this card is very good in limited in the format of draft and sealed. When you build a 40-card deck out of fresh booster packs, then this card is very good in Rivals of Ixalan sealed, which means that it has a lot of potential in Standard Pauper. That's a good rule of thumb. So Snubhorn Sentry, 1-mana, 0/3. When you have Ascend, which means you have 10 or more permanents in play, you get the City's Blessing. As long as you have the City's Blessing, he gets +3/+0, which basically makes this a 1-mana 3/3 in the mid to late game. Now, most of the time, your decks that want to play a bunch of 1-drops don't want a 1-drop that's only going to be good in the late game. But once you do get to the late game, spending 1 mana for a 3/3 is way above the curve. So if your deck can kind of be built to get to 10 permanents in play, then this is a reasonably strong play. Here we have Grasping Scoundrel. Jeff, I think, has been playing Red-Black Pirates. This has been his Red-Black Pirates deck. I'm not that big of a fan of this guy. A 1-mana 2/1 when it's attacking. He's not the best blocker. Having 1 toughness is a little bit of a liability in the format. But he is a pirate, which is a relevant creature type, and he attacks for 2 on turn 2. So it's a decent 1-drop, but not my favorite. Haven't seen him have too much. Seen this card have too much success so far. Festering Mummy. I think I had this in the sideboard of my White-Black Vampires deck that we did a deck tech on. It's a 1-mana 1/1. He'll attack for 1. He'll block. The highlight of this card is that it can trade with 2/2s, right? So if they attack with your 2/2, you block with this. Their 2/2 has 1 damage on it, and then you put the -1/-1 counter on it. The 2/2 dies. Even if you can't trade with a card in that way, Festering Mummy can still shrink a card. So you have a body, it might get in for some damage, it might trade with something in combat, and you can shrink something. This is especially good if your opponent is also playing a bunch of 1 toughness creatures, so you can block 1 toughness creature and then put a -1/-1 counter on the second one, essentially getting a 2-for-1. So not the strongest creature in terms of power and toughness or in terms of getting in for damage, but this guy is very good at getting card advantage. So Festering Mummy is on our list here. Blightkeeper, Kyle did play this card in his mono black aggro deck. 1-mana 1/1 flyer. It's just you're gonna play it on 1, and then you're gonna start getting in for damage. It's not quite unblockable, but it's almost like unblockable, kind of like Mistcloak Herald and Slitherblade. Some more non-intuitive ones here. Shorekeeper. When Julian played blue-black control, he played Shorekeeper in his deck. Comes down, soaks up some damage, gets some blocks in. If it lives until you have 8 mana, then you might pop it to draw 3 cards. I like other draw spells better in this. I did not play this in my version of blue-black control, but Julian did play it, won a tournament with it, so it made the list of notable cards. Fireshrine Keeper. I'm not sure how good this card is. Menace is pretty relevant for pushing damage through, especially if you have combat tricks to kind of support the creatures. Troy was playing this in his mono red vehicles deck, and it did work for him, so it's on the list here. Frilled Sandwalla. Tegan played this in her blue-green aggro deck. It was amazing. 1 mana, 1/1. You can pay 2 to pump it as to get +2/+2. You can use that ability as an instant, so you make that decision after they declare blockers. Just having a 1 mana creature that can attack for 3, gives you a lot of flexibility of making sure that you're spending your mana to relevantly impact the board. Probably Green's best 1-drop creature. The other 2 1-drop creatures that Green has here are Jade Bearer and Jungle Delver. We've seen Jungle Delver be played in Merfolk. Aiden has been tearing up this scene, playing blue-green Merfolk basically the entire time, and Jungle Delver has been a 3-of in his deck. He did bring it to Standard Pauper F&M, which had youth players and adult players in it, and he said that he was trying out cutting the Jungle Delvers from his deck, wanted to play more pump spells. So I think Aiden correctly identified that Jungle Delver is one of the weaker cards in his deck. It's just a 1 mana 1/1. The ability on this card is not relevant until you get to the late game. So he was trying out other cards. Wasn't sure if he wanted to play more pump spells or not. But one card that he did not consider was Jade Bearer. I have not played with this card. My initial reaction is that this card is just not that good. But in a Merfolk deck, if you did want to push the curve a little bit lower, this card might be the way that you do it, right? If you go turn 1 Mistcloaked Herald, and then you go turn 2 Jade Bearer, put a counter on Mistcloaked Herald, that's not the worst thing that you can do, right? So Jade Bearer might be a consideration for the Merfolk deck specifically. Unfortunately, because the ability is the reason why you play the card, you're not going to play this in any other deck besides Merfolk. So those are kind of like the creatures that see play. Fanbearer and Sacred Cat we've already spoken a ton about. Slitherblade has been in a bunch of decks. Skittering Heartstopper, I guess, a 1 mana 1/2, that's slightly above curve for a 1 mana creature, right? Having that extra point of toughness. And the fact that you can pay a mana to give it Death Touch, this guy will trade up in combat. Just a solid card. So that's it for 1 mana creatures. Dominaria might add more 1 mana creatures. There's one in particular, especially in green, that I'll probably mention in another video, but there will be more 1 mana creatures added with Dominaria. But the 1 mana creatures are kind of the backbone of any aggro deck that you want to build. Excuse me. But even if you're not playing an aggro deck, you still need to keep in mind the 1 mana spells especially. So if you're not playing an aggro deck, you might play some of these 1 mana creatures, especially the utility ones like Fanbearer, Skittering Heartstopper maybe, Fanatical Firebrand. Like, these guys are still good in other kinds of decks that aren't necessarily trying to be aggro decks. But the other decks still want to be able to play 1 mana instants, because the 1 mana instants are how you're going to be able to kind of catch up against the aggro decks or get ahead against other decks that have similar curves to you. So being able to cast cheap combat trick is definitely something that you want to be able to do here. These are probably the best ones here. So each color has at least one 1 mana combat trick. Kind of the standard is 1 mana to give it +2/+2. White, this one lets you gain 2 life, which is good when you're racing. Shed Weakness. We haven't really seen too many decks that take advantage of the -1/-1 counter mechanic, but still just 1 mana for +2/+2 is fine. Built to Smash. Even if you're not casting this on an artifact, you're still probably using it to trade up in combat, so Built to Smash is a great magic card. And then we saw Kyle's mono black aggro deck use Skullduggery and Supernatural Stamina to really good effect. Supernatural Stamina lets you trade up, brings the creature back, so the fact that it doesn't add toughness isn't that big of a deal. Adding the extra power lets the creatures trade up. And then Skullduggery kind of sometimes gives you a 2-for-1 if your opponent has a 1 toughness creature, right? You attack with your creature. If they block, you can pump up your creature and give it +1/+1, and then shrink another creature, or you can essentially give your creature +2/+2 in combat, right? Pump your creature and then shrink the creature that it's in combat with, giving your creature essentially a +2/+2 bonus. So that's kind of the standard rate for 1 mana combat tricks, and that goes a long way to kind of edging out close combats or being able to trade up. So even if you are not playing an aggro deck, you still want to keep these 1-mana combat tricks in mind. There are spells that impact the board even outside of combat, so the 1-mana removal spells. I guess Skullduggery kind of counts as a 1-mana removal spell since you can kill a creature, but these really good ones are definitely Unsummon, Shock, and Magma Spray. So Unsummon gets a creature off the table for good, or not for good, but no matter how big the creature is, you're getting it off the table. Unsummon is especially good if your opponent is playing, if you're able to target 2, 3, 4, 5 mana creatures with Unsummon, this card is amazing. If your opponent is only playing 1 mana creatures, Unsummon is not that good because you're trading. Unsummon doesn't. You're spending a card and you're not trading with a card. You're just sending it back to their hand. So Unsummon is really only good if you're able to get tempo off of it. So very good against decks with high curves. Not very good against decks with low curves. But if your opponents are putting auras on their creatures, you can always return a creature that you control to your hand, like if your opponent is targeting it with a removal spell. So Unsummon is just very, very flexible. The cost is right. It costs 1 mana. And then Magma Spray and Shock. Don't really need to say too much about this. We've spoken about these cards so many times. Being able to kill a creature for 1 mana. It kills all of the creature. Both of these cards kill all the creatures that we just talked about on this list, which is very important. They also kill most of the 2-drops in the format. So Magma Spray and Shock are just always going to have targets. And then I guess the last one here is Dual Shot. This card is especially good in the aggro deck mirror because so many of these 1-drops have 1 toughness. There's a fair amount of the 2-drops that have 1 toughness, and being able to take out 2 creatures for 1 mana is great. It says, keep in mind that Dual Shot says up to each of 2 target creatures, so if they have only 1 creature with 1 toughness, you can still just kill it with Dual Shot. So very, very flexible cards. Having cheap removal spells is very important here. I guess the last category of spells here that we want to feature are, I guess we'll call these smoothers. I'm sorry, Ornamental Courage is also a 1-mana combat trick. This one is especially good with Exert creatures, or, if you are attacking your opponent and you want to keep your creature back on defense, it adds, essentially... Shed Weakness adds 4 power and toughness to your creature. This adds 4 power and toughness as well, just in a different mix. So Ornamental Courage might sometimes be better than Shed Weakness. Shed Weakness is just more aggressive. So keep Ornamental Courage in mind. So these are the smoothers. I guess we can include... we'll talk about the implements separately. So the smoothers here, Opt, Commune with Dinosaurs, Attune with Aether, and Renegade Map. These cards really just let your deck be more consistent, right? If you're spending 1 mana to kind of make sure that your deck is able to do its thing more consistently, you don't want to spend too much mana on cards that don't impact the board. But spending just 1 mana on a card that doesn't impact the board but helps your general game plan is great. Opt, we see a lot of the control decks playing Opt, right? Sometimes you need very specific answers. Opt helps you go looking for them. Opt also helps you make your land drops. Control decks really want to be playing their land drops every turn, so Opt really just helps you get to whatever you need, and the price is right for only 1 mana. Renegade Map, some decks care about playing cheap artifacts, in which case Renegade Map kind of lets them play a higher percentage of artifacts in their deck, because it is essentially a land. As long as you have your first mana, every copy of Renegade Map kind of acts as another mana, so you can kind of lower your land count and play Renegade Map instead. Same thing goes with Attune for Aether. You can lower your land count to play this card, and it creates energy, so the energy decks definitely get a little extra bonus out of this. Both of these cards also fix your mana, so if you wanted to play a 3-color deck or a 4-color deck, both of these cards help you add consistency to your deck in that way. You can go get whatever color you're missing. The last card that kind of helps smooth, Commune with Dinosaurs, 1 green, look at the top 5 cards of your library, get a land or a dinosaur card from it. So you obviously don't really want to play this card unless you have dinosaurs in your deck. and a good number of dinosaurs in your deck. But if you do, having essentially a split card, right, that lets you get a land or a dinosaur just helps with consistency, right? Whichever one you're missing or you need more, that you need right away, you'll get with Communion with Dinosaurs. So these are kind of the 1 mana cards that smooth the deck. They don't necessarily impact the board, but they do impact your game plan. The last 2 categories that we'll look at here, I'm saving the best for last. You guys, if you follow the channel, you know how I feel about Honed Kopesha and Inventor's Goggles, but we'll talk about those last. So the Implement of Combustion, Implement of Ferocity, these, again, the decks that care about having a high percentage of cheap artifacts in them, right? The decks that want to trigger come into play abilities or cast abilities might want to play these cards. Essentially, they come into play, they don't do anything, and then you can sacrifice them for a small effect. Red one deals 1 damage to target player. Green one puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And, you know, neither of those effects are really worth a card, but these cards replace themselves, right? So you're spending a little bit of mana. It's kind of tempo negative, so it's a little bit different than the other cards that we've looked at, which you want to play because they're tempo positive. But so these are a little tempo negative, but they give you a small effect and they replace themselves. So any card that does something and replaces itself is worth keeping in mind, especially when the thing that it does adds to the board, like Implement of Ferocity. It makes your creature bigger and you draw a card. Implement of Combustion doesn't necessarily add to the board, but it does whittle your opponent's life total down, and it replaces itself. So, you know, it's a nice investment for 1 mana to play it, and then 2 mana, a second mana to get the ability. And the last 2 cards that I want to focus on here, Honed Kopesha. If you're playing an aggro deck, you should strongly consider playing Honed Kopesha in it. It's just that good. Yeah, 1 mana to play. It doesn't do anything until you equip it, but the equipped creature gets +1/+1. Even if the creature dies, the equipment stays around, so you can equip it to your creature, attack. If they block and kill your creature, then great, you probably trade it up. If not, then you can move it to... well, either way, I guess you can move it to a creature that didn't attack, and you can use it to block. So moving your Honed Kopesha around gives you stuff to do with your mana in the late game that is going to impact the board. Same thing can be said for Inventor's Goggles. Inventor's Goggles gives a slightly bigger bonus, costs a little more to equip, but it has the ability of synergizing with Artificers. The 3 really strong 2-drop Artificers. Blue has a 2 mana Artificer, Aether Swooper, that's amazing. Black has Aether Poisoner, 2 mana Artificer, that's amazing. And red has Aether Chaser, which is a 2 mana Artificer, that's amazing. Inventor's Goggles goes really well with all of them. So, yeah, that's kind of our look at all of the 1 mana spells that are kind of worth playing in Standard Pauper. If you're playing an aggro deck, you should definitely kind of start here in terms of building. If you are not playing an aggro deck, you should definitely keep these cards in mind, because especially the spells are how you're going to be combating the aggro decks. So hopefully this video was insightful. It's a little different than what we usually do, but just wanted to kind of take a step back, look at the big picture of the format before Dominaria comes out. So let us know what you think in the comments. Which of these colors are you most excited about playing? Do you think that the 1 mana cards are necessary to be competitive in Standard Pauper? You know, let us know what you think. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you like the content. Subscribe button will keep you'll keep getting updates on Standard Pauper content. Make sure that you ring the bell if you want to get all of our updates. If you only hit subscribe, you'll only get some of the updates. And then, last but not least, you know, please consider becoming a patron subscriber if you like what we do here. It is completely funded by our Patreon community. So, you know, even if you're only contributing $1 a month, you're helping us do what we do, and we appreciate you. All of our Patreons get access to our monthly expenditure report, so you see how we're spending your money. Right now, the majority of our money is going towards funding our scholarship tournament. So, you know, this tournament wouldn't be possible without our Patreons. So, big thank you to them. And, you know, if you like what we do, please consider becoming a patron. So, thanks for stopping by. I hope to catch you later, and I will see you on at the next video. Cheers.